where we use data tables and pivot tables to estimate probabilities empirically. So we've got a Girl Scouts going door to door selling cookies. She has a 60% chance of making a sale at any one household, and she plans to call at 12 households this afternoon. How likely is she to make more than 8 sales? So we're going to set up a simulation first. She's going to visit 12 houses. Grab house 1 and drag over. That should name them for us. There's our 12 houses. She's got a 60% chance of making a sale at house number 1. So we can simulate that with an if statement. So if a random number is less than 0.6, then we'll call that a sell. Otherwise, it's a failure. And we'll indicate that with a 0. So we'll get a 1 if she makes a sell, a 0 if she does not make a sell. That way, when we sum up all of our 1s and 0s, we know how many houses she made a sell out of the 12 houses. So let's go ahead and put a cell in here for that, equals the sum of those 12 houses. So that particular time she sold at 6 of the houses. If we hit F9 a few times, we can run some more simulations. There she sold at 9 houses, 7, 6, 8, 10, etc. So we want to do this a large number of times, but we don't want to sit here and hit F9 a large number of times. So instead we're going to set up a data table. So I can put a 1 in this column, and then select the 1, and I'm going to go to the fill, which is on the home tab. So get the home tab, and then fill and series. So we want the series to be in a column rather than a row. We're going to have a step value of 1, so the table goes 1, 2, 3, 4. And let's go ahead and do 5,000. Okay, so we've got a table going from 1 to 5,000. I want to split the screen here. And I don't really need to split that way, so let's see if I can get rid of that one. There we go. So that one's split horizontally. Let's move this bottom tab down so I can see the bottom of my table. We can see it's stopping there at 5,000. Now to complete the table and get my iterations, again, I don't want to just fill this down because I get some very strange results. Because when I fill down, my references A7 to L7 change to A8 to L8, and I have nothing there. If you might think we could F4 those, I put in our dollar signs and then copying down. I think that would work. But you get the same 5,000 copies of the same calculation, and that's not what we want. We want 5,000 independent calculations. So let's undo a couple of times here. Okay, so instead what we're going to do is use a data table. So we're going to select our entire table. So I'm going to click on the 1, shift click down here to select both columns. I'm going to go to Data, What If Analysis, and grab Data Table. I'm going to leave the row input cell blank. I'm going to click on the 1 here for the column input and click OK. And now I've got 5,000 different calculations. Basically hit F9 5,000 times and recorded all the data. And of course, tons of great data, but with a lot of data, it's hard to see what's going on. So we want to summarize this data. And that's where we create our pivot table. So I'm going to click anywhere on the table. We're going to go to the Insert tab and Pivot Table over here on the left. And looks like it grabbed all our data. And we'll click OK. And probably should have given those names. Actually, let me go ahead and do that. Let me put a couple names in here. That's going to make things a little nicer. So this is just my count. It's not really anything. And what I've got here is the number of cells. Okay, so let me grab that again. Never hurts to go through this twice. Insert, pivot table, and it did select all our data. No, it did not. So we're going to grab the data and click OK. Alright, so now our variable number of cells is labeled here. Just makes things a little easier. So I'm going to grab that, drag it down here to the rows, and I want to change, instead of sum of, I want to change this to count. So it actually counts how many cells we made. Okay, and adds up to 5,000. So again, what we've done is simulated approaching 12 houses, knocking on the door for those 12 houses, counting how many of those 12 houses we made a sale at, and recording. So from that example, 8 times when we went to those 12 houses, we only made sales at 2 houses. 1,159 of those 5,000 calls, we made sales at 7 houses. 1,114, we made sales at 8 houses. And we actually want to find, let me jump back here to our question. How likely is she to make more than 8 sales? So more than 8 would be 9, 10, 11, or 12 sales. And so that's going to be this data here. How likely is that to happen? So rather than looking at the count, what we want to do is come over here, grab our value fill settings, and change, rather than summarize values, to show values as the percent of the grand total, the percent of the 5,000. Okay, so now we know that about 14.5% of the time she made a sale at 9 out of the 12 houses. About 6% of the time she made a sale at 10 of the 12 houses. Just under 2% of the time she made a sale at 11 of the houses. And at less than 1% of the time she's made sales at all 12 of the houses. Okay, so the Girl Scout made a sale at more than 8 houses. Okay, let's just sum up 9, 10, 11, and 12. The time. So she made a sale at more than 8 houses about 22.4% of the time. Okay, another example here. We've got a simplified dartboard. It's painted so that there's only 3 numbers on the dartboard. It's set up so that the probability of hitting a 5 is 70%, so 70% of the area is painted red, and red is worth 5 points. 20% of the area is painted green, and green is worth 10 points. And 10% of the area is painted black, and that's going to be worth 20 points. So we're going to throw 3 darts and hit the board. We'll make a big assumption there we actually hit the board, but randomly hit any one of those areas on the board. What's going to be our most likely score? So to do this, I'm actually going to set this up a little bit differently. This is a little bit more complicated of a problem, in that we've got more than one outcome. It's not just sell or no sell. It's 5 points, 10 points, or 20 points. So my if statement is going to have to be a nested if statement this time. So if a random number is less than 0.7, then that's going to be worth 5 points. If it's not less than 0.7, we're going to need a second if statement. If that random number is less than 0.9, then that's going to be worth 10 points. So that'll give us a score between 0.7 and 0.9 will be 20% of the time. We'll get a score of 10. Otherwise, 10% of the time we'll get a score of 20. And I'll need two parentheses at the end there because I've got the two if statements. And I'll hit enter. Okay, so a little bit complicated of an if statement, so let's double check it. So when my random number came at 0.2, that should be worth 5 points, and that's what I've got there. Hit F9 a couple of times. 0.18 is also worth 5 points. 0.68 is worth 5 points. 0.5, 0.3. Okay, there I finally got some big points. So when it came larger than 0.9, then I'm getting a 20. That makes sense. 0.89 is between 0.7 and 0.9, so I should hit that 20% of the time, and that's worth 10 points. Okay, so I think I've got an if statement that's working. Let's get a few more random numbers here. And I should be able to just copy that over, and that should all update. So that if statement's referring to B7, that's correct. And this if statement's referring to the random number in C7, that's correct. Alrighty. So again, I'm going to create a data table and do a lot of iterations here. So I want the sum of the three darts. And again, if I hit F9 a few times, I've got my sums. Okay. And now I want to create a data table, then take the data table and create a pivot table. So to do the data table, I'm first going to create a series. And I do that by going to the Home tab, grabbing Fill and Series. I want this to be a column because that's a little easier to see, at least I think so. Starting at the 1, steps of 1, and stopping at 5,000 is a nice big number. That should give us plenty of data. And then I'm going to go ahead and get a split screen here. That one. There we go. And adjust that so I can see the top of my data table and the bottom of my data table. And again, we can't just fill down. What I want to do is go to Data, What If Analysis, Data Table, leave the row input cell blank, the column input cell is going to be my 1 there, and click. I needed to select the whole table first. Oops. Okay, click, shift click, grab both columns, Data, What If Analysis, Data Table, 1. Okay, and there's my data. Okay, so if you think about this a minute, we're not getting old numbers. Our possible outcomes from each throw of the dart are 5, 10, and 20. The smallest score we can get is a 15. The highest score we could get if we got 3 20s would be a 60. But we're not going to hit all values in between. We can get scores of 15, we can get scores of 20, we could get a score of 40. So only certain values are possible here. And let's see, I'm going to grab the data and create a pivot tab so we get a better idea of what we've got going on here. So the pivot table, we go to Insert, Pivot Table, and looks like I grabbed all my data. And I forgot again to label my column. Let's see. Just go ahead. I think that will. Yeah, that confused it. Okay, let me undo here. Get back to my example. insert data table. Grabbed all my data. Okay. And then the score is what we want our rows to be. So you can see our possible outcomes, 15, 25, 30, 35. And I do that automatically. Okay. Again, we don't want sum of scores. We can do count. So we can see out of those 5,000 iterations of 3 throws of the dart, we did get the 60 8 times out of the 5,000. And let's go ahead and modify that to get our percents. So the field settings, that's going to be show values as and percent of grand total. And I'll convert those. Basically, it's going to divide all those numbers by 5,000. So 34.6% of the time, we got a score of 15. 29.3% of the time, we scored a 20. 8% of the time, we scored a 25. 15% of the time, we scored a 30. Interesting. Okay, I've forgotten what our question was. What would be the most likely score? Well, looking at this, our possible scores are 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, etc. The most likely score, the one that appeared the highest number of times, is the 15, and that's probably not a surprise. So our results then is 15. Okay, and if we've got an answer like that, we can go to the home. We can merge and center those cells. We can wrap this text, float it in there, put it in a box, and we could even add a little color to it. And it just makes it a little easier to spot your answer on a worksheet. Okay, hope you found this helpful.